question is what is truth? When we go to the Bible, can one Bible passage destroy another Bible passage, or do they say the same thing, yet one is an unfolding to understand it better, even if it seems to be contradictory, but it is not contradictory? We see that with the state of the dead, we see that with hell. We see these things all through the Bible in doctrine. So is the doctrine of the Sabbath day. And I want to show it from a math equation that when we think we know what truth is, 1 plus 1 is 2, is it really so? Now let's see this from math. Let's just say that there's 3 people, 3 guests that go and check into a hotel, and the manager tells them that the cost of it is $30. So each of them pull out $10 and hand the manager $10, and they've paid $30 for that hotel room. So they go back to their rooms, and when the manager's there, he's like, oh, I shouldn't have charged them for that extra person, the same, because it technically should be 4 people that I should have charged them. So he felt guilty about what he did. He overcharged them. He's like, oh, you know what? He calls the bellhop to him and says, here, take this $5, and he gives him 5 $1 bills, or 5 loonies if you're in Canada, and says, go give this back to the people that just paid for the room, because I overcharged them. So they need to be refunded this $5. So the bellhop's on his way to his room, and he's thinking about it, and he's like, okay, so there's 3 people in this room, and I have $5, and it doesn't divide equally into 3 people. So he thought, you know what? I'm doing this. They won't mind it if I keep it a tip for myself. And he stuffs it into his pocket, and he goes and he sees the 3 men, and he gives them each $1 each. So now, each of these men have now paid $9 for that hotel room. So 9 plus 9 plus 9 is 27, or 9 times 3 is 27. And the bellhop kept $2. But they paid $30 originally. Where did that $1 go? It's just gone. Now, how does that work? Does that mean that 9 plus 9 plus 9 does not equal 27? Or does that mean that 2 does not equal 2? Or does that mean that 30 is not divisible? How does that work? Well, today, people can do all these fancy math equations and make things work out and force conclusions. And so people do with the Bible. And we find this exact same scenario in the Bible.
Years ago, when I was homeschooling my kids, I wanted to encourage them into learning math. And quite often, with a lot of different things, we'd watch documentaries just to learn about it and see it from a unique perspective. And my kids loved watching a lot of these documentaries. And then one time I thought, let's watch a math documentary, and maybe this will help encourage them and they can see how math can be used in everyday life and things like that. And I found this really good documentary. And we started watching this documentary, and it was good and it was very encouraging, and it was showing all kinds of unique stuff and really neat stuff. And then all of a sudden at the end, it took this really strange twist. And all of a sudden, it questioned math. And I didn't even know what to think or say. And it just kind of floored me because I never ever thought to question math, whether it was true or not. And the question was posed, is math real, or is it something where we just force a conclusion and just put a whole lot of numbers to things until we can have something that is consistent and a pattern that works out, even if it's not perfect?
It is amazing how God's calendar reflects this in almost every particular. But before we go there, I want to show the Sabbath in a unique way too. In the Bible, we find this in a word problem, and it's found in Genesis 2, verse 2, which says, and on the 7th day, God ended the work which he had made. And he rested on the 7th day from all his work which he had made. So, on the surface, that just seems like, well, that makes sense. For people that are Sabbath keepers, it makes sense. But for somebody that's not a Sabbath keeper, they look at this passage and goes, oh yeah, so they finished working on that day. So they were working on the 7th day, and then they rested on the 7th day. It's like if you go to work for half day, you worked on that day, and then you rest for the other half of the day. Now, a lot of people might be going, oh no, that's not what it's saying at all. But sometimes we just need to substitute a few words for it to become understandable for us, who are Sabbath keepers to begin with. And we have this idea that Saturday is a Sabbath, and this was both of these days was talking about Saturday. So for this word problem, I'm just going to change a couple words. I'm going to use the word bill instead of God. I'm going to say Saturday instead of Sabbath day, because that's what everybody believes it is anyway, is that it's a Saturday. And I'm just going to say what Bill made, because we know God made the earth, but Bill couldn't do that. So we're just going to say Bill made birdhouses. And we'll read this sentence exactly the same way again. And on Saturday, Bill ended his work which he had made birdhouses, and he rested on Saturday from all his birdhouses which he had made. So all of a sudden here it's saying Bill was working and he finished building his birdhouses on Saturday. So if he finished building them on Saturday, that didn't say that he finished building them on Friday. And some people will argue that that's what it means. But if we were to stand in front of a judge in a court of law, and we're taking this passage and we're talking about Bill. So Bill finished making his birdhouses on that day. And if somebody were to say, well, no, he actually finished on Friday, not Saturday, the judge is going to look at you and he's going to look at Bill and he's going to say to Bill, when you said Saturday, did you mean Saturday? And he say yes. That means that the person saying Friday would be found incompetent in the judge's eyes. But if Bill said, no, I actually meant Friday, then the judge would have to say, well, Bill, that was that statement can't hold any water or any weight, because that would be an incompetent statement in the judge's eyes, and therefore Bill would need to change his wording. Hence, I believe that when God ended his work on that day, that it was that day that he ended his work. So when we look at that passage, all of a sudden we have to realize that, hey, if we have these 2 7 days, and we know from the commandments of God, it says, you shall not do any work on the Sabbath day, just as God didn't do any work on the seventh day. And God never created anything on that day, because he never said, let there be anything. We see that happened 7 times before that day. God said, let there be light. And God 7 times before that, 7 times, remember that, 7 times before that time said, let there be something. And then when we go to Hebrews, we see that God didn't do any work. So there's a call not to do any work, just as God didn't do any work on that day. Therefore, when we look at this passage, we have to conclude one of two things. We have to conclude either that the first seventh day was actually the sixth day, or the seventh day was actually the eighth day. But this whole math equation, remember that math equation where there was there was a dollar missing, right? So we're going to find a missing day here, which is pretty fascinating. So this missing thing is something that has no mark, which is even more fascinating, because in the Bible it talks about the 30th day being a day of no mark. I have videos on this in my Sabbath playlist. Now, while this might sound crazy, the God's Bible calendar actually shows this even more beautifully. And if we're going to say things like this, it has to be supported by the Bible in more than just one spot. While that text was plainly a thus saith the Lord, it was also saying something. It's not figurative. It's not figurative because it's all literal, but it's teaching something. So it's a thus saith the Lord when you understand it with the rest of the Bible. In Exodus 12, we find a calendar that God laid out in the time of the Passover. Now, a lot of people will say, well, that was something completely new. That was never anything from the beginning. Well, we can see that before that time, they kept the Sabbath. Before that time, they kept the new moon day. And we're going to find that the Bible actually tells us that it's impossible for a new calendar to be introduced. Because in Ecclesiastes 1 verse 9, it says, the thing that hath been is that which shall be, and that which is done is that which shall be done. There is no new thing under the sun. Well, there's no new thing under the sun, which means that that's not a brand new calendar, because it was under the sun. And there's nothing new under the sun. And some people might say, well, God instituted all those feasts, all that's new. But no, every one of those feasts were types that pointed to the Lamb that was slain at the foundation of the world, right? So even the Passover, Tabernacles, Pentecost, all those things happened at the foundation of the world. It happened right at the very foundation of the world. It was all explained there. Now, if you look up the word foundation and trace your word through the Bible, you will see what that is. So I'm going to dare say that this math problem is actually created to prove the Sabbath day. Now let's look at the how this mirrors the Sabbath day with God's calendar to give us an idea of how the Sabbath actually works. Because we are looking at the Sabbath day in Genesis 2, verse 2. Now we're going to look at God's calendar. So, in the Jewish calendar that everybody can acknowledge from Exodus 12, we see that there's a 29th day and a 30th day sometimes, and it interchanges. Now, look at that math problem. We have $29 and we have $30. Then we have three people in that situation. Well, do we not have three people in our situation too? In John 17, verse 21, it says, this is Jesus in his prayer to the God the Father. It says, that they all may be one, as thou, Father, art in me, and I in thee, that they also may be one in us, that the world may believe that thou hast sent me. So all of a sudden you see that God's saying, okay, or Jesus is saying, God is with me and we are one. And then if they become one with us, all three of us are one. So we have three individuals. So what could the manager be representative in this period of time that took this money and gave back some of this money? Now, I can't say I have all understanding of this because I haven't figured it all out, but there's something fascinating here. We often will hear somebody say, oh, old father time. The manager is representative of Father Time, which is God the Father, the one who created time. So we have a 29th day and a 30th day, just like we have the $29th and the $30th. And while that might seem really unique, then we also have the bellhop. Who is the bellhop? Well, the bellhop can be identified as the Roman Catholic Church, which is really interesting. And what did the Roman Catholic Church do? It changed God's Bible calendar and gave us Pope Gregory's calendar, so which happened, I think it was the 1500s. All of a sudden, we have a pope that created the calendar that we follow today, which meant that the calendar that God had created with the Jewish people has been kind of lost and hidden over, and the world doesn't even recognize it. It started becoming recognizable in the 1840s with William Miller. And then the other dramatic thing that was stolen. So you had one thing that was stolen, and then you had another thing that was stolen was the Roman Catholic Church changed the Sabbath from Saturday to Sunday. But even in this, there is still no new thing under the sun. We see this continually through the Bible. So while the Roman Catholic Church hid these two pieces of time in their garments, what is time if we just everybody knows it today? Time is money. Shucks, even the world acknowledges that these two pieces of money, the $2 or the 2 talents or the whatever you want to call it, represents time. There's probably a Bible verse for it. I never thought to look for it, but there probably is. So that takes us to a verse that we have to realize that speaks of a plural time and not a singular time. In Daniel 7:25 it says, and he shall speak great things against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws, and they shall be given into his hand until a time, times, and a dividing of time. So interestingly enough, come this time, this end of time, all of a sudden we start seeing unfolding that we start understanding God's calendar, we start understanding the Sabbath day, and it was not a perfect understanding, but a perfect understanding will be revealed at the end of time.
So, for those that recognize that the moon was not created on the fourth day, as the passage in Genesis 1 tells us, then they can recognize that the moon reflected light when God said, let there be light. Whether it was created or reflected at that time, I can't say 100% sure, but I believe that it probably reflected the light of that God said, let there be light. So this was a mingling of two different times because the moon time does not equal the same as the sun time. It doesn't go in the same, it doesn't have the same path and it doesn't work out in the same amount of time. So what is interesting about this is because you have a mingling of time for the first 4 days of creation, when you had an evening, which created the first day, the second day, the third day, it was all without the sun. But then you have the sun all of a sudden mingling a different set of time because the sun was created to rule the day and it showed the day. And you had now a 24-hour system laid over top of another system that had an irregular path of time. And this is what causes the calendar to be a 29-day calendar and a 30-day calendar because it's a lunisolar calendar. It's not based on visibility like sighting. It's based on the conjunction, which happens over the ocean near Africa. So here I just want to show you something. This tells us when the lunar month starts every month. Now this is when the conjunction of the sun, so when the sun first shines on the moon, is considered the new moon. So what we need to realize is that the moon can't be seen for a few days. And then when it's seen again, this is the time that it happens. So it'd be January 21st at 20:53. So that's 8:53 p.m. And then the next time it's going to happen is February 20th. So it takes roughly 29 days, 10 hours, and 12 minutes for that lunar month to complete its cycle. And the cycle is based on when the sun appears on the moon. So you're looking for the sun reflection off the moon. You're not looking at the moon specifically. You're looking for the moon in order to see the sun. So it actually creates you not to worship the moon or the sun because you're looking for the sun reflecting off the moon, but you want to see the sun, but you won't look at it to find it, which is really interesting. But these times change. So here we see that we're at 29 days, 13 hours, and here we can see we 29 days and 16 hours. And it varies. So the months the times change because the path of the moon is not the same as the path of the sun. They actually have different, I guess, elliptical paths might be what it's called. And there's some interesting things to think about with this. And I'm going to show you a little bit more. So this is showing part of the reason why it will be all of a sudden a 29-day calendar and sometimes a 30-day calendar because it's not always just 29 days. But sometimes you go a little bit further and then you have to add and take away. That might be a little bit harder to see. I'll show it a little differently from this app right here. So that now, while I might not agree with this ministry, they have a fantastic app and it's good because it has all the information that you want and need. And then it helps you to be able to look to nature to see the Sabbath day and to learn it and understand it for yourself. So this will be tomorrow, the 12th day. It's going to be a Sabbath. And we can see that the moon rises at 12:02 a.m. and sets at 9:46. And then we go to the next day and we see that it rises at 1:26 a.m. and sets at 10:09 a.m. So the moon is actually in the sky at the same time as the sun, and you can see it quite often through each month because the moon spends an equal amount of time in the daytime sky as the nighttime sky. So here we're at 4:10 a.m. is when it rises and it sets at 11:26, and you can see that it's not in our sky to see a whole length of time. Here we can see that it's 6:12 a.m. and then all of a sudden it's 6:50. So it's not even an hour and a half difference there. It's only 40-ish minutes. So there's some really interesting things there. But now let's just look at what God's Bible calendar actually looks like. So this is God's Bible calendar where you have the new moon day starts every month, and you find that Genesis 1 verse 3. And then you have 6 working days till the Sabbath. 6 working days till the Sabbath, 6 working days to the Sabbath, 6 working days to the Sabbath. And then you have this 30th day, which is the same as that math problem that we're looking at. And this 30th day you find in Luke 12 verse 1, where it's first mentioned, like the only spot, well, there's other spots where it could be mentioned in the Bible, but this one for sure is like a plain thus saith the Lord. That's what it's talking about. If you, as long as you believe in keeping the Bible in context and not making it just figurative all the time. And this is a mean day, which means that it's a day of no mark. So this is what is equal to like the $30, the 30 talents, or because talents, time is money, or a regular month will be 29 sometimes. So this is pretty interesting.
If anybody has any questions about that, I do have lots of videos you can watch about that. There's lots of videos, even just from the Seventh-day Adventist Church, that'll take you down to 1844. And while not everything will be correct, uh, almost everything is. It takes you down the 2300 days, takes you 1844. It starts showing
God's Bible calendar.
So here we see that one is not always necessarily one, which we see with that one verse that I read before where it says, Jesus says, to the Father, we are one. And then it says, and then if we become one with Jesus, then we are one. And if we're, and then so you have two in one, then you have three in one. And then if I'm married and I'm one with Christ, and my wife is one with Christ, then there's four of us that are all one. Time, numbers is not something that man can hold. Yeah, we can do all kinds of math equations. It actually took mathematicians 379 pages, I believe, of math equations and problems to prove 1 plus 1 is 2. So that just goes so far as to show us that what we think is always truth and reality is not always truth and reality, but the Word of God is. We can see in this text from Genesis 2 verse 2 that there were two seventh days, and because God didn't work on the one, but it said he worked on the one, all of a sudden we can realize that there is two different counts of time going on. Just like there was two different counts of money to go on in that math equation. The $29 was exactly true and right, and the $30 was exactly true and right, and you can't say that either of them was wrong. They were both right. And that's why it says in Isaiah 66, verse 23, and it shall come to pass that from one new moon to another, and from one Sabbath to another, shall all flesh come and worship before me, saith the Lord. Right? So every new moon. Why do we worship God on the new moon in heaven? What sense does that make? It makes perfect sense in light of what I've just shared with you. At least I think so, anyway. But I also have a great, like a good, strong foundation from the Bible alone, right, without speculating, and all my other videos dealing with the Sabbath.
Now, some people might think that the calendar in Noah's day was a 30-day calendar, but it's not. The same math problems start happening when you start adding it up, and you'll realize that it was not a 30-day calendar in his time, but it was also a lunisolar calendar that gives us the Bible calendar that we find all throughout the Bible.
All the math equations in the world can never add up to how immeasurable God is. In Revelation 10, verse 6, it says, and I swear by him that liveth forever and ever, who created the heaven and the things that are therein are, and the earth and the things that therein are, and the sea and the things which therein are, that there should be time no longer. And that started in 1844. Beautiful. So beautiful. And Psalms 89, verse 37 says, and it shall be established forever as the moon, which is established forever, and as a faithful witness in heaven.
What people need to realize is for those people that think that they're lost and that they've went too far and they've spent their whole lives not following God, that God's Bible calendar and the Sabbath shows that they can redeem the time and come to God even at the end of their lives. That's how much God loves us.